I'm sorry, the book tried to fly away. Hey, y'all, I am back. Okay, for those who were not here for the first half of this chapter, I had to make a quick pause because I needed to make it to my therapy session, which was actually incredibly insightful and allowed me to get a lot of the pent up, well, I shouldn't say pent up feelings, a lot of emotions that I have been putting on the side. What does that mean? It means that, as a dear friend of mine from high school, Jillian Hogan Miller, love you so much. She gave me the best sound advice to all of us during the last nights of the seniors in the vocal department. And she said, choose your battles. Learn how to choose your battles. Not everything deserves your energy. And you gotta be very quick to discern who is worthy of that and who isn't. Shout outs to her. She's amazing. Okay. Let's go ahead and continue our reading of the rest of this chapter. And then that will be the end of part 2. And then we will start part 3 next week. So the last time we were here, Jane, Barney, and Simon have met up with the Rowland family. And John Rowlands is questioning them, like, do you know what Will and Bran are? And basically kind of hinting to the fact, like, do you know that they're into some magical, supernatural stuff? And they're like, oh yeah, we're fully aware. We just didn't know if you were aware. So it's kind of like a shared secret among them. And John Rowlands is saying, he's like, I want to help them, but I don't want to know anything of what they're doing. Which is fine when you're very perplexed about things that you may not understand. So, let's go ahead. After all, Jane said shakily, knowing with no reason that Simon was now on her side and turning to him, it's no more odd to understand a language that you don't know than to be switched into a time before you were born. No, Simon said in a voice so reassuringly his own that Jane felt dissolved in relief. No, not really odd at all. John Rowlands called beside them. What news of the Sarah Ellen? The man stared. You haven't heard? A letter from Dublin was the last. It came yesterday. The man on the Francis Amelia paused, put down the line he was coiling, called a few words to someone else on board, and leapt over the gunwale and down to the jetty. It came up to John Rowlands, his face lined with concern. Bad news, Evan Rowlands. Very bad. I'm very sorry. The Sarah Ellen foundered off Skye 2 days ago with all hands. We heard yesterday. Oh my God. John Rowlands said. He put out a hand gropingly and clutched the man's arm for an instant, then turned and moved away, stumbling as if he were suddenly old. His face was gray and hurt. Jane longed to go after him, but she could not move. How was it possible to comfort grief that was naked on a living face and yet had been gone and forgotten for 100 years? Which was more real, her own bewilderment or Evan Rowland's pained look out of his grandson's eyes? The man called Easton said, looking after John Rowlands, and his brother aboard. He looked around at the 2 and 3 other men who had been standing near, and his face was grave. Something is not good. That was the 4th boat built by John Jones Aberdouvie to go down in 3 months, and all of them new boats too. It was not a great storm that took the Sarah Ellen, they say, but only a heavy following sea. They're all the same, one of the men said. They dip the stern under. Every one of his vessels does it now, and then there's strain and the leaks come, and down she goes. Not everyone, another man said. No, not everyone, but that's true. John Jones has built some very good boats indeed, but the bad ones... I have heard it suggested, said the man called Easton, that it is not in the design, but in the building. That it is not John Jones's fault at all, but one of his sawyers, and any work that he handles, he broke off. Conscious suddenly of Jane's anxious stare, and switched on to his face a broad, deliberate smile. Waiting as usual, is it? For all the young ones, but too polite to ask? He reached into one of his capacious jacket pocket and brought out a square package. Here, put some in my pocket for the first one of you who will come smiling and begging at it, and for not asking at all you shall inherit it, little one. Thank you, said Jane, and for the second time that day started herself by dropping a little bobbing curtsy. Folded paper in her hands, he had put 4 enormous wood-hard ship biscuits. Just these hard biscuits. It just reminds me of Alice Through the Looking Glass, where the Red Queen makes her run around the tree. Faster, faster, don't try to talk. And then they take a break because Alice is exhausted. She's like, have a biscuit. And then Alice bites into it. It almost chokes to death because it's so dry. And the Red Queen goes, thirst quenched, I hoped. Off with you, said the man amiably. Into the oven in a dish covered with milk, isn't it? And a knob of butter on top, lovely. Lord knows it's good if someone enjoys the hard biscuit the way you all do. Not so good halfway across the Atlantic, I can tell you. But then you would swap the lot for a good warm slice of barabirth. The others laughed, and suddenly it was as if the last two words had turned a key back again to relock a door, for now they were speaking unintelligibly in Welsh together, and Jane knew that the difference was not in the language they used, but in her own hearing of it. She had been able to understand it for a short, enchanted while. Now she could not. She clutched at Simon's unfamiliar stiff sleeve and drew him away. What's happening? I only wish I knew. There's no logic in it. Everything all mixed up. Where are we? And when? And why? The why is the biggest. Let's go and find Barney. I know, all right. As they walked over the broad spaced timbers to the street, Jane glanced sideways at her tall brother. Somehow in the rough old-fashioned suit he seemed taller than ever and more controlled. Had he changed too? No, she thought, it's just that I wouldn't normally bother to think what he's like at all. They were walking up the road past little cottages gay with roses and snapdragons and sweet-smelling stock, two of my favorite flowers, roses and snapdragons. Among daffodils, nadashinko, cherry blossoms, chinaberry trees, magnolia blossoms, water lilies, lotus flowers, miracle roses are our favorites, daisies, hydrangeas. Yeah, I think I got them all in that list. I probably missed one, but no worries. Past terraced houses, far grander and newer looking than they had seemed in the days they were yet to come, past a resplendent coaching inn with its broad, hanging, newly painted the Penhilg Arms, two men walking ahead of them greeted a stumpy, sun-tanned figure standing in the doorway of the inn. Good day, Captain Edwards, Jane thought. We are back in Welsh again. Good day. Did you hear about the Sarah Ellen then? I did, said Captain Edwards, and I remembered when we spoke of it, I was thinking of paying a call about John Jones. He paused. And on one of his men, maybe. Perhaps we might go with you, one of the two men said, and as he turned, Jane saw with a shock that it was John Rowlands again. She had not recognized him. Not only the clothes were different, but the walk as well. A sound of hammering came from somewhere below the road, down by the sea. And a high rhythmic screeching that Jane could not identify. At a cautious distance, she and Simon followed the three men to the edge of the road, where it overlooked a flat yard just above the high tide mark. So what you're trying to understand in this moment is that potentially Jane, Barney, and Simon are slipping in and out of the past and the present, which is very interesting because Will and Bran left to go to the Lost Lands, which means that something to do with either the high magic is causing these three characters to shift in and out of time, which has never happened before in the four other books. So let's continue. The shipyard was surprisingly simple. A couple of sheds with next to them a curious box-like structure leaking threads of steam. It was perhaps 2 feet high and wide, but very, very long, dozens of feet long, and attached to it by a pipe was a big metal boiler. Nearby, the red skeleton of a boat lay in a wooden cradle, a long keel branched by the bare oaken ribs to which only a few planks had as yet been set. Huge bulks of timber, the yellowish-white color of pine, lay piled on the ground, and beside them gaped a long, deep pit, deeper than the height of a man, where sawyers cut the wood into planks. Jane stared, fascinated. A piece of timber lay lengthwise over each pit, supported on small logs set across. One man stood below it and another above, and between them they worked up and down a long saw set in a frame which produced the rhythmic shrieking she had heard from a distance. 2 other sawyers worked in a similar pit close by. Others were shifting the timber, stacking planks, tending the steaming boiler beneath which a fire burned so hot as to be almost as invisible in the warm summer air. A boy looked up and saw the 3 sailors and gave a kind of salute. He ran to the sawyer, working on the top of one of the pits, shouting to be heard over the rasp of the saw. Captain Humphrey Edwards, Captain Ewan Morgan it is, and Captain Evan Rowlands up the loft there. The sawyer signaled to his partner, stilling the long blade before it came down again for the next cut. He stared up. Jane, peeping over the side of the rough, rock-edged road, saw a pudgy face topped by astonishingly bright red hair. The man was scowling with no sign of friendship or welcome. John Jones has gone to the wharf, the red-haired man called. To see a shipment of pine just come in. He bent down again dismissively. Craddock Lewis, said the stumpy captain from the inn. He did not raise his voice, but even at normal pitch it was kind of a voice accustomed to being heard above a gale at sea. The red-haired man jerked up petulantly, hands on hips. There is work to do here, Humphrey Edwards, if you please. Aye, John Rowland said. It is your work we should like to talk to you about. He stepped over the low rocky wall and went down a flight of rough steps to the saw pits. The others followed him. So a little later, when no one was paying attention, did Simon and Jane. What boat is this you're working on, Craddock Lewis? Said Captain Edwards, looking thoughtfully at the graceful curving frame, all ribs and keels standing skeletal on the stocks. Lewis looked at him sourly, as if about to snarl, but seemed to change his mind. She is the schooner Courage for Elias Lewis. I should have thought you would have known that. 75 feet, and a month overdue already. And over there, he nodded at a half-rigged hull already lodged floating on the dock. That is the Jane Kate for Captain Farr. They'll be floating here spares over from Euless tomorrow in high time too. And you had a hand in both of them, John Rowland said. Well, of course, man, said Lewis irritably. I am top sawyer for John Jones, isn't it? And no doubt responsible for much, said Captain Edwards, stroking his side whiskers. John Jones being a busy man with a great many keels laid down on one another's tails these last few years. Well, the Integrity was your work too, John Rowland said, and the Mary Reese, and the Elias Davis. Each time Lewis nodded his red head impatiently. Rowlands went on biting off his words like a child biting a biscuit. And the Charity and the Sarah Ellen? Lewis scowled. You choose the ships of unfortunate men. Yes, I do indeed. The sawyer and the other shipyard workers had put down their tools and came drifting closer to listen. They stood in a group, restless, eyeing the captains resentfully. I've just heard about the Sarah Ellen, Lewis shrugged with shallow regret. It is a pity about your brother. And no new thing in this village. No new thing about among the ships that you work on, Humphrey Edwards said. Craddock Lewis's pale face flushed with anger, and Jane saw his hands tighten into fists. Now look here, he began. You look here to us, Craddock Lewis, said the third man who had not spoken since they entered the yard. He was a small, olive-skinned man with a fringe of gray beard. Two of those boats I've watched to sea keeping company on the Labrador run, and both had the same failing in that none of John Jones's designs, if I know him. Careless he is and a little greedy for work, so that he has not the time to supervise as those builders do who will not work on more than one keel at a time. But it is not his doing for a boat to dig in her stern and founder in a following sea. That is the work of a man every time giving more length at the stern than there should be, and more than a few times letting planks go by that were steamed too quick and had cracks beginning. A rumble of anger came from the listening workers, so what he's basically saying is that this man does shoddy work, meaning that his work has a tendency to break down and fail when it's given the illusion that it's a brand new boat. So what they're accusing him of is sabotage. The red-haired man was wet at the mouth with rage. He could scarcely speak. Prove it, Ian Morgan, he hissed. Prove one small part of that. You think you can prove I deliberately set men to their deaths? There must be some way to prove it, John Rowland said, his voice grim and deep, for true it is without a doubt there is more in you than you know. We've been wondering a long time, we three, and now this loss of the Sarah Ellen is too much, and we are sure. Sure of what? That you are different, Craddock Lewis, with loyalties that are not like those of other men, serving in some dreadful way a cause that is not that of men at all. The words had such cold conviction in them that the men near Craddock Lewis shrank unconsciously away from him a little, and Lewis sensed it and yelled at them in sudden fury so that they dived back at the nearest piece of work. But there was no fury in the way Craddock Lewis looked in at John Rowland's. There was instead an icy, arrogant hatred that made Jane shiver because she had seen it before, once, in a man dedicated to working the will of the dark. Lewis, with his pasty face and his raw red hair, did seem to be totally a creature of the dark, but he was the more frightening as a result. Such malice living without apparent reason in an ordinary man was something Jane could hardly bear to contemplate. She could sense anger rising in him like a steam in a near-boiling kettle. Lewis came slowly towards the three men, clear of his sauce pit. He said tightly, "I am a man as you are, Evan Rollins, and I will show you that I am." And all at once he seemed to erupt, flinging himself on John Rollins, his face twisted horribly by snarling rage. Caught off balance, Rollins was thrown backwards in a rattling shower of gray slate, and Lewis was after him like a dog, arms flailing, smashing. The two other captains rushed to part them, but now the men from the shipyard had dropped their tools and come deliberately in the way, and there was suddenly a great melee on the ground. Stocky Captain Edwards knocked a man down with a horrible click of teeth as his knuckles had met the man's head. Then he disappeared beneath a trio of others, and beside him, shouting and fighting, Ian Morgan hauled them away. Craddock Lewis struggling with Rollins, stumbling to his feet, gasping with malice, and reached for balance to kick with his hard-booted foot. Jane shrieked, and then Simon was past her in a flurry of arms and legs, clutching at Lewis, crying out as the toe of one heavy boot met his own shin. Simon was never quite sure precisely what happened then. Fighting to drag Craddock Lewis away from John Rollins' inert form, he found himself suddenly thrust down towards the sea in Lewis's grip. Quite unable to resist, they splashed into the water together, still upright, still struggling, and suddenly Simon felt himself jerking outward, falling, and the water closing cold over his head and no bottom to be felt with his feet beneath the sea. One brief touch of the sand he had with one foot, and then the water was swinging him round, a current catching him, pulling him deeper, alone. He reached up for air, kicking desperately, caught one breath, was swung away again by an eddy, reaching out in frantic efforts to swim, his arm and legs heavy with the weight of his old-fashioned suit. There was a roaring in his ears, a blurring in his eyes. The water whirled around him, round and around and around. Simon fought to keep back panic. He had a secret and terrible fear of deep water, even though he could swim well 3 years earlier. In a dinghy race on the Thames, he had fallen from a capsizing boat and come up underneath the floating mainsail, kept down from the air like a cork in sealed jar. He had panicked then, splashing wildly, only by pure chance reaching the edge of the sail, and then in a desperate gurgling flurry, the shore. Now he could feel the same panic rising again in his throat and mind, rising like the waves that had whirled him about with only an occasional snatch of breath, rising to blur his brain, to swamp out all thought. He thrust away. He fought and fought to keep his mind, the feel of each arm, each leg, to move as he chose to move, to seek the rhythm of swimming instead of the mindless flurry of horror and despair. So by great effort, he kept from panic. But still the water was there all around, less violent now, cradling him, and again he was going down. Water pressed in on him. It was in his ears and his eyes and his nose, but now it seemed not frightening, but lulling, mothering, as if it were not after all alien, but his own element. It welcomed him gently, as if quite naturally breathed water like a fish, gentle, all enveloping, relaxing like the feel of the moment before falling gradually asleep. Someone seized Simon from behind in a fierce grip, two strong hands on his shoulders, pushing him upward and out into bright air. Light cut into his eyes, water bit the back of his throat. He gasped, retching, choking. The water swished in his lungs with each gurgling snatch of breath. Simon heard terrible, frantic, bubbling gasps and realized appalled that he was making them himself. Then there was solid sand beneath his feet. The swimmer released him. Simon stumbled forward on his hands and knees, and strong hands laid him on the beach, turned his head sideways and pressed out on his back. Water poured from his nose and mouth. He coughed, retching. The hands gently helped him to sit up. Simon sat with his head on his knees, breathing at last without the dreadful gurgling, without gasping, more slowly. He brushed his wet hair from his eyes, sniffing, and looked up. First he saw Jane, wide-eyed, white-faced, crouching. Beside her a man was bent on one knee, his great height apparent even while stooping. His dark clothes dripped water. The face, frowning and concerned to Simon's, was angular and craggy, dark eyes shadowed in deep sockets, bristling white eyebrows dripping water down the sides of his beak-like nose. The thick white hair, gray with wetness, lay in a tangle of loops and horns all over his head. Simon said in a high, weak, husky voice that was not his own, "Oh, Gummery." He stopped, feeling a prickling in his eyes. He was not used to that pet name for a long time. "That was brave," Merriman said. He pressed one hand on Simon's shoulder and glanced up at Jane, beckoning her closer. Then he stood up. Jane put a diffident arm round Simon's shoulder to help as he turned to watch. John Rollins was standing close by on the beach, dripping from head and clothes. Jane said in Simon's ear, "He jumped in the sea after you tried to reach you when—" His voice seemed to dry into nothing. She swallowed. "When Great Uncle Mary just came out of nowhere." Oh, hold on. Interruptions. All right. Uh-oh. I didn't mean to do that. Oh, goodness. Alrighty, hold on. Let's go ahead and continue, because that was not meant to happen, but it's fine. Yep, it's fine. Alrighty. Oh, okay, never mind. Alrighty. We're back in the mix. Let's get the music back, no worries. Okay. Yes. Okay, sorry. Merriman loomed before them, angular in his wetness, tall as a tree. Before him on the beach, the men of the shipyard stood motionless in a group. With the two gray-whiskered captains angry and silent nearby, Craddock Lewis stood in the midst of the shipwrights, red hair gleaming. He was staring at Merriman, transfixed like some small animal caught in a mid-stride by an angry badger or fox. And the anger in Merriman's eyes as he looked at the red-haired man was of such depth that both Simon and Jane, watching, shrank from it. Craddock Lewis moved slowly back, cringing, seeking escape. Then Merriman reached out one arm with the first finger stiff, pointing, and the man froze, pinned into stillness once more. "Go," Merriman said softly in his deep voice like black velvet. "Go, you who have sold yourself to the dark, back from this bright Aberdivi of the river to Dynas Modwin, where you came from. Go back to where the dark lurks in the hills round Kadar Idris in the realm of the Grey King, where others wait in black hope like yourself. But remember that since you have failed in this attempt here, your masters now will have no time for you, so beware after this in years to come, that you keep your sons and your daughters and the sons of your daughters away from any trifling with the dark, for the dark, in its vengefulness, will surely destroy any one of them that it can take into its power." Without a word, Craddock Lewis turned and walked away over the crackling gray slate, up the rough steps and away along the road until they could no longer see him. Merriman looked at Simon and Jane, then he turned towards the sea, past the silent men in the shipyard huts and the half-built ship, and in a strange, gentle gesture, he opened his arms wide like a man stretched on waking, looking up at the sky. And out of nowhere a seagull came swooping past, low over the water, harshly crying. Their eyes followed it. Followed. And when it rose again out of sight, suddenly they found that they were dressed once more in the jeans and shirts of their own time, standing on a narrow slately beach a few feet below the level of the iron-railed pavement, alone with John Rowlands and Merriman. In Simon's right hand was a piece of flat slate. His first finger was curled around it as if it were in throwing. He looked down at it, shrugged, bent, and skipped it over the surface of the water. It bounced impressively in a long, skipping trail. 8, Simon said. "You always win," said Jane. Their clothes were dry, only Jane's hair was damp still from the rains of the morning. There was nothing to show that Simon, Merriman, and John Rowlands had ever been in the sea. Jane peeped at John Rowlands as he stood there blinking in perplexity, and she knew that he did not remember anything. He looked about dazed, then he caught sight of Merriman and became very still. He stared at him for a long moment. "Darrow," he said at last huskily, "what is this? You. I've never forgotten you from when I was a boy. Do you remember? Is it you?" Jane and Simon looked listening, puzzled. "You were Will's age then," said Merriman, looking at him with half a smile, "up on your mountain, and you saw me riding." John Rowland said slowly, "Riding on the wind. Riding on the wind. I wonder after that if you would remember. There was no harm in it if you did. Who would have believed you? But I put it into your mind that you had dreamed it to leave you at rest. And indeed I did think that I had dreamed it until this moment, that I see that same face again, unchanged after so long, and wondered why it is here." John Rowlands turned his head and looked at Simon and Jane. "This is Will's master, is it not? And known to you as well?" Simon said automatically, "Great Uncle Mary." John Rowland's voice rose incredulously. "Your great uncle?" "A name," Merriman said. His eyes clouded. He looked away over the estuary at the sea. "I must go. Will needs me. As the dark knew, Simon, when it caught you in peril in a time from which only I could ransom you by leaving the place where I was." "Are they all right?" Simon said. "They will be if all goes well," Jane said anxiously. "What can we do?" "Be at the beach at sunrise. Your beach, Merriman said. He looked at her with an odd, straightened smile and pointed up the road. And take your small brother home to tea. Turning, they saw Barney's yellow-haired face prancing towards them down the road, with Baldwin Rollins in his wake. And when they turned back again to the beach and the sea, Merriman was not there. And that is where we will end for today. Like I said, next week we'll start part 3. And I will see you all next time, y'all. Oh, excuse me. Bye-bye, lovelies. Bye-bye.